I'm glad to see everybody here. This is a great turnout. This is a great turnout. I see a lot of my own students here, but I see a lot of people who are not my students, which is great to see that people are interested in the topic today. And so let me start out by welcoming you here on behalf of the University of Washington Debate Union and the Department of Communication. For the panel we have today titled Women in Advocacy, a discussion on women's experience in public argument. My name is Dr. Michael Souders. I'm a lecturer here in the Department of Communication and the director of the University of Washington Debate Union. Today's a pretty exciting day for me. This is the very first in a series of events called the Topics in Public Argument series, which is an occasional series sponsored by the UW Debate Union to put leading scholars, practitioners, students, and the public in close conversation about one of the essential cornerstones of democratic life, which is argument in the public sphere. This is one of two series being introduced by the UW Debate Union as a part of our mission to improve campus and civic dialogue in the way that we can as an academic institution. Let me take a moment to talk about the University of Washington Debate Union. See if I can have the current debate union members. I think we have three of them here today. If they would stand up really quick. So these are the undergraduates. That's Tim Pollard. This is Dylan Thomas. This is Zach McGearing. And Margot Littman is not here at the moment. The University of Washington Debate Union is a part of the Department of Communication in the University of Washington. Is an organization that has the goal of promoting active campus dialogue, developing and improving civic dialogue in the local community, and developing an intercollegiate policy debate team. Debate is a unique activity. It's one of the few occasions in the academic setting where students become the teachers, where they stand up in front of an audience, take responsibility for an argument that they have to learn and know, put that argument to the test against other competitors, have to respond to other people, and then have to refine their knowledge and account for all of that. That's a challenging activity that makes people take responsibility for what they're saying, learn about the opposition, and develop new viewpoints. And part of the Department of Communication's commitment to student education and to excellent scholarship is represented by the University of Washington Debate Union. The Debate Union is open to all University of Washington undergraduates and graduate students, and as a part of that process, I hope that some of you will consider joining us for our open meeting, which is on November 13th at 6:30 p.m. in the Communications Building 136. There's a flyer above the coffee if you're interested in that process. No experience is needed to become a part of this. You don't need to be involved in intercollegiate competition. That's people who go to other campuses and debate other schools. You can be a part of the campus and community debate program if you wish. Tonight's panel is an important one. Significant evidence exists that indicates that in this country, women's relative opportunities are higher now than they ever have been before. More women than men attend college, more women than men attend degrees, and women are increasingly influential in corporate and government life. Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In leads the pack of recent books by corporate women on how women can and should succeed in the business world, assuming they make huge sacrifices. Simultaneously, influential publications in the public sphere like the Atlantic Monthly and the New Republic have run long series of articles on the growing influence of women in public and business life, while also noting that substantial barriers and hostile standards still exist in those areas. That women face scrutiny in the realm of argument is not too hard to notice. Female candidates for public office face extensive criticism on things like their physical appearance. And any person who has seen the comment section of a YouTube video or online article that involves a question of gender knows that there is a great deal of anger and resentment boiling somewhere under what can sometimes seem like a relatively calm and accepting environment for women in public discourse. In the scholarship of argument, which this department and myself specifically study, much of our thinking about women's role in argument is still dictated by a few works, including that of Deborah Tannen, who equated vigorous disagreement what she calls an argument culture to some extent as a masculine trait. My guess is that a few people on this panel might disagree with that. But that 10 is still one of the most recognizable persons in our field to the public, might say something about how we understand the status of women and gender in arguments overall. The issues that women face in advocacy are not limited to politicians or to scholars. Professional fields, including like the sciences and law, are still largely made up of men. The American Bar Association reports that as of 2013, 66.7% of those in the law profession are men. Only 27% of those earning doctorates in sciences, mathematics, statistics, and physical sciences are women. That's in each section, not cumulatively. In computer science, 20% of those earning doctorates are women. In engineering, it's 18%. And while that's better than it was for my own mother, a graduate of the civil engineering program at the University of Hawaii, who was the only woman in her cohort of 1985, that's still not very good at all. The makeup of these fields, to some extent, surely has to have an impact on the way we talk inside of those fields, and then again the way that those people talk to us about the important things that they have to say about public life. Our panel is uniquely qualified to talk about these issues from both a scholarly perspective and from a professional perspective. Let me introduce the different panelists, and maybe they can give you a wave as I introduce them. And this is the order that they will speak in. Dr. Leah Ceccarelli is a professor of communication and a leading scholar in the area of rhetoric and science. Her in-press book on the frontier of science is in the case outside in the hallway, and you can take a look at that. And she has written extensively on how science operates in the public sphere. Patricia Novotny has several associations. She's a private attorney specializing in appellate family law and a volunteer for Legal Voice, an organization dedicated to advancing women's rights through the law. And she has argued several cases in front of the state Supreme Court, and Legal Voice is an organization that I believe you just told me brought the case for marriage equality in front of the court, correct? She's also a lecturer in the Department of Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies here at UW, and is also a faculty member at the law school. Is that right? Do I have that right? Yes. Dr. Jerry Phillipson is a professor of communication here, and is an innovator in speech communication theory, an important voice in scholarship on cultural communication. Dr. Phillipson's book, Coming to Terms with Culture, I think is also in the case outside. Is that true?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I have copies available.
Copies available. And he is to boot an experienced and an informed debater himself. And last we have Lindsay Shook, who comes to us from James Madison University, where she's the assistant director of debate. Ms. Shook is an expert in debate competition, and recently sat as a judge in the final round of the Collegiate National Debate Tournament, which decided the National College champion. And she's a role model for many women and an innovator of arguments about the culture of debate and its impact on women in education as an educational activity. Let me briefly explain the format, and I'll turn it over. I'll ask a very general question. It's going to be a very general question. Give each of our panelists in alphabetical order a chance to respond to it in 5 to 10 minutes or so. After that, I'll point some questions to the panel and give them a chance to respond. And then we'll open it up to the audience, and you can ask questions. Hopefully, despite the fact that this opening has been kind of set piece, that it could be a fairly loose conversation, and we have an opportunity to hear for some wonderful people, have some great questions, and you can give your input as well. So let me turn it over to Dr. Ceccarelli, and with the basic question of, so what's going on with women in advocacy?
So what's going on with women in public advocacy, or as Professor Suter put it in the email question that he asked us, it's sort of the same thing but slightly differently worded. What issues, challenges, or advantages do women face in public argument? Since I'm starting, I thought I'd go ahead and mention the most obvious challenge, which is rooted in a long cultural history that segregates men and women into separate spheres of activity. The public sphere being the proper domain for men, and the private sphere being the proper domain for women. The images here are of the gargoyles on UW's own Rate Hall, the old home economics building, and you can see there they represent women at work in the private sphere, cleaning, sewing, and cooking. As Joan B. Landis put it, an etymological examination of the term public reveals the masculine assumptions at its very root. The word comes from publicus, which means under the influence of the pubes, which is the adult men or male population. As Landis put it, the very meaning of public is inherently masculine, and this influences the connotations that we attach to the term. A public man is one who acts in and for the universal good. A statesman, right? A good man speaking well. On the other hand, a public woman is a prostitute. Taking a woman out of her private domain places her in the commons as a sex object to be used by anyone in the community. Fortunately, though, words are flexible, and it turns out that one opportunity for women in public argument comes from the very fact that the feminine is aligned with the disparaged term in these value hierarchies. This allows rhetoric itself, which is the art of public argument, to be associated with the feminine, as opposed to the more masculine endeavor, philosophy. For example, in Plato's treatise, The Gorgias, the philosopher disparagingly aligns rhetoric with cosmetics and cookery, feminine activities of artifice and seduction, in contrast with the more authentic study of truth, philosophy. So if philosophy is the more valued masculine term, then rhetoric, as the disparaged term, is also a feminine art, and thus public argument becomes, ironically, available to women. In the Middle Ages, rhetoric was associated with women, with the feminine, in this way. You can see here Dame Rhetorica, the allegorical representation of the art of public argument. But you'll see here that the negative connotation has been largely eliminated from this image, as her masculine and feminine qualities are united. In the 5th century, Martianus Capella described Lady Rhetoric thus: "Behold a woman of loftiest stature and great assurance, with countenance of radiant splendor, helmeted and crowned with royal majesty, she held ready for defense or attack weapons that gleamed with the flash of lightning. As a queen in control of all things, she has shown the power to move men hither she pleased, or hence to bow them to tears, to incite them to rage, to transform the mien and feeling as well of cities as of embattled armies and all the hosts of people." That image of Dame Rhetorica, right, is neither a prostitute nor a housewife barefoot and pregnant in her kitchen, but the vision of a fierce and powerful creature. So that's an opportunity. My own scholarly specialty is the public rhetoric of science. Now, in this area, women face a double whammy. Not only do we have to overcome the lingering assumption that the public sphere isn't our proper domain, but we have to overcome the assumption that we don't have what it takes to talk credibly about science. It's especially difficult for women scientists, I think, to engage in public argumentation as experts in their fields, since the prototype of a scientific expert in the public imaginary is decidedly male. When kids are asked to draw a scientist, they almost always portray a solitary male in a lab coat working with dangerous chemicals. As Professor Suter pointed out, I have a new book. It just came out. It's available now through Amazon. On the public rhetoric of science in America. In it, I focus on a single metaphor that's been really prevalent in public messages about science since about the middle of the 20th century. That is the idea that the most exciting research done is done on the frontier of science. This metaphor constitutes American scientists as frontiersmen, also stereotypically male, with a manifest destiny to penetrate the unknown, and a competitive desire to claim the riches of new territory before others can do the same. In public speeches, arguing for more public funding of science and science education, scientists often call young people to imagine themselves as the Lewis and Clarks of the laboratory. Ambitious research facilities are imagined to be a voyage of discovery, and whole fields are characterized as participating in a gold rush as they race each other for ownership of that knowledge territory. So my analysis of public arguments about science funding demonstrates that with this metaphor, the archetype of the frontier explorer to which scientists are compared is a white male risk-taker, eager to isolate himself from society for long stretches of time as he makes a bold thrust forward into dangerous new territory. This image of science is especially troubling in an era when there are more women than men in the recruiting pool for scientific careers, right? More women in the university, going to university than men. And when the most pressing research questions facing scientists in areas like global health and climate change require people with the ability to work cooperatively with others on problems of global significance, not the lone sole hero working in an isolated area. Words, though, as I said before, are flexible, so there's always an opportunity. I think there's an opportunity for women in this frontier metaphor, not just a constraint. Without completely overturning a metaphor that's so ingrained in our public culture, I think public speakers can take advantage of revisionist histories that imagine or that emphasize the outrages of our frontier past in exploiting people and divvying up land to those with the most money and power. Lessons that help shape our current attitudes towards the intellectual territory that our scientists are exploring. And women engaged in public argument about science can use revisionist histories of the frontier to value women as well as the men who shaped our future in our frontier past. Female scientists can call for the new Sacagaweas of the laboratory instead of the new Lewis and Clarks. A hero whose communication skills helped a team negotiate its way through danger, while literally balancing work with family life on her capable back. Or public speeches that seek to shape the future of science can emphasize the wagon train cooperativeness of international research teams rather than the gold rush competitiveness of isolated masculine genius. This more integrated vision of science as both masculine and feminine provides more opportunities, I think, for women to participate in the inventional possibilities of science itself at the same time that it makes use of varied inventional rhetorical resources for women who engage in public argument about science.
You can stay in your seat if you want.
Oh, this is fine. I just followed the microphone. Wow. So, I didn't prepare anything quite so well. In fact, I had plans to prepare something, but maybe you've heard that Anne Lamott joke, if you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans. That's kind of what happened to me. Actually, I wanted to make a little joke because when I was thinking about the advantages and disadvantages, I realized how much in my public advocacy I rely on humor to break the ice, to get my point across, for all sorts of reasons. I think partly this was initially just a survival mechanism. I found myself, by no coincidence, because I'd gone to law school, in rooms full of lawyers over and over again, and I'm desperate for somebody to make a joke. You know, please, somebody, make a joke. And I realized I couldn't really count on anyone, so I had to start doing it myself. And I do it pretty regularly at the Supreme Court, as the justices there will tell you. So I did spend some time, in fact, reflecting on the topic, and I realized that in some ways I'm quite different from Professor Ceccarelli because I don't really think much about it. I just do it. I do public argument. I have practiced law now for close to 25 years in the appellate courts of Washington, and I don't know how many arguments I've done. And so I didn't really think about it, so I thought, well, advantages, I could think of those. I've been lucky to work in a state, in a time and a place where women have flocked to the Bar Association. We are well represented, relatively speaking, in government in Washington, as well as in the bench and the bar. And so that's been a real advantage. And I was having trouble thinking of disadvantages. And I would mention this to people as I puttered about my life, and they would laugh. Are you kidding? And I'd go, right, I'm sure there are some. Let me think of them, let me think. And I'd go back and try to reflect, and I realized, in fact, what has happened with me is I don't think about them. And I think it's a survival technique. I'm not ignorant of them, and in fact, this is probably going to be really interesting for me to, I'm being reminded, oh yes, oh right. But I think, you embrace the reality, acknowledge it, see what's out there, what's going on, and then you put it to the side. It's like when you end up at court and you realize you're in the wrong skirt, or you've got a big run in your hose, or, and this is the one I really hate, I've forgotten my notes. I brought some other argument notes with me. Oh, right, completely wrong. You just have to go on and deal with it. Put it aside and do your job. And I think for the most part, it's, as a consequence, just a little hard for me to think of disadvantages. I think most of the time I go to court, I don't think about the fact that I'm female. I don't think about the fact that I'm short. In fact, I know in my mind I am 5'8". I just know it. People tell me this is not true. And I go to the doctor and she, just the other day she did this, and I said, no way am I 5'3". Come on, let's try that again. She says, stand up straight. I said, I am standing up straight. So, some of it is just your self-image. You get out there and you need to make an argument, and you need to focus on what you do know well about, which is your job. You just do it. You concentrate on your work. And I guess when I was thinking again about the advantages, disadvantages, I kept coming back to it's a yin-yang thing. For every disadvantage I could think how it really worked to my advantage. So for example, I tend to be kind of a nervous person. This is the exception, but mostly that translates into over-preparing. I spend hours and hours preparing. And so when I get up there, it just takes over. And you just do it. So that seemed to me just, again, a yin-yang thing. I think the other thing, and I do fully understand and respect the notion about different discursive modes that men and women bring to things, or different styles. And I've seen that, I've lived that. I also know it's not static. It's a very dynamic thing, and that there's huge variability among individuals, and there's huge opportunities for transformation, for adaptation. I can take on certain tools that might be characteristically masculine without too much trouble. And I think men I know can do the sort of reverse. They could take on the cooperative styles as well. One thing I've never quite mastered is the style of intimidation that is often associated with lawyers. I just don't like it. The blustery letter, I'm like, I get them and I don't even answer them. I'm like, let alone write them. I just don't have that kind of time. And I think a lot of men have learned that they're not that valuable. By contrast, a lot of women now write blustery letters. So there's a lot of, trading back and forth of these different styles. I think, again, this is where the yin-yang thing comes into play. I do think that women bring to the law, and when I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking a lot about in this different voice notion that Carol Gilligan introduced some years ago. And I do think they bring some skills that maybe, and I hate to stereotype too much, but women may be socialized often to listen better. And I have found that if anything has made me a good advocate in court, it's my ability to listen. Because at the appellate level, when you do an argument, It is not, you are not there to make a speech to the justices or the judges. They do not let you most of the time. They pepper you with questions. And the better you can listen to those questions, the better you can actually answer them. And so I think my ability as a listener has been a great advantage that I see often in my colleagues, male and female alike, but it's true that it dominates often. I see it more often in my male colleagues. They fail to get the question. I'm like, you know, did you listen? You got to listen to what they're saying. So again, it's a yin and a yang. Yeah, that's basically all that I prepared, if you can call it that, to say to you. And I'm looking forward to kind of mixing it up with you and hearing what your questions are of a practical nature, like what it's like out there. So thank you.
Dr. Phillips, you can stay there if you wish.
Oh, okay. I think I will. I might stand in the middle. I'll see. Well, it's very appropriate. I'm here with 3 women, and I'm going to talk briefly about 3 women. Women in argument. The first of these is, well, first of all, this is my bumper sticker. I invented this when I was a debater at the University of Denver in 1966-67, and my partner had formed a company that year that produced debate handbooks and various other things. And so I sold him this slogan. And he said, "I will send you a check every year, Jerry." I got one. 15 lousy bucks. But it was fun. First, Mary Follett. Mary Follett is a woman who was born in 1868 in Boston and died in 1933. I calculate that 65 years. She didn't go to Harvard College, but she went to the Harvard Annex. She grew up in Boston and graduated summa cum laude in 1898. It was right next to Harvard, and it was taught by Harvard professors. Why did she go there? Harvard didn't accept women. She wrote a senior thesis on the House of Representatives, or the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and was published as a book 4 years after she had completed her undergraduate degree. But she hadn't been admitted. Okay. Achievement. She wrote several other books and became a pioneer of social thought, a pioneer of conflict resolution and human relations, and a penetrating social and political scholar and advocate. Never had a university appointment, was seldom cited by people who were absolutely dependent on her work over the years. Social psychologists, political scientists, sociologists, communication theorists, etc. But she laid the groundwork for all that we know of conflict resolution in the US and the Western world today. But in 2003, Yale University Press published a biography of her that thick. And it's really an education to read that book. And you see a powerful woman working from the side, interjecting, interposing ideas. What about debate? Well, most of her time she was spending penetrating organizations, helping them work more effectively. But in 1900, she walked around Ward 17 in Boston, Boston's Roxbury neighborhood, a lower working class white neighborhood, and she established the Highland Union, a club in which young men could come to debate contemporary political issues. And so she taught debate to lower working class men, young Irishmen, so that they could hone their skills of judgment and powers of expression on matters such as public ownership of street railways, the election of senators by popular vote, and freedom for Ireland. She was empowering them and helping them find an effective public voice. The second woman in public argument I want to talk about is a little bit later than Mary Follett. Mary Follett is one of my heroes, by the way, but so is this second woman, Henrietta Bell Wells. If you've seen the movie The Great Debaters, 2007, and if you haven't, do it tonight. Buy a copy. Come to me. I'll give you a copy. I've got several. It might be the best movie you have ever seen. It might change your life. Now, the centerpiece of that movie is not a woman. It's a man, Melvin Tolson, who, other than Dr. Souders, is probably the greatest debate coach in the history of the world. He's played by, who's the famous actor? Denzel Washington. I'm sorry, thank you. Yeah. But in real life, he was better looking. And I'm sure he was smarter. He was an awfully smart guy. There's a whole book, a biography of him, but otherwise not too well known. But he was, in many ways, quite a nationally influential guy. But he was the debate coach in a little college in Texas. And that debate team, it was an African-American college in Texas. That debate team traveled the country in the 1930s, and they beat everybody they debated. Now, in the movie, they debated Harvard, but it was actually USC, University of Southern California, who had been the national champions the preceding year. So they beat the national champions on their home ground. It's really a dramatic film. It's pretty authentic if you read some of the scholarly and historical treatment that it's based on. Well, the key woman debater, or one of the major, in the book there were 4 members of the team. One was a woman. And in the movie, the woman in the movie was modeled after Henrietta Bell Wells. Henrietta Bell Wells got a scholarship, got to come to Wiley College in Texas. She had been born in Houston, Texas, to a West Indian single mother, but she was a brilliant student, and the debate coach, Mr. Tolson, found her and pulled her out and pulled her into the debate team. And she became one of the debate team stars, and as she's portrayed in the film, she was certainly a great debater. She was certainly successful. She was only on the team for 1 year because financial pressures made her stop to work in order to continue her education. She went on to be a social worker and teacher in Gary, Indiana, Houston, Texas, and so forth, and served as the Dean of Women at Dillard University in New Orleans. Died in 2008. A wonderful character in the film. And then you see on the little trailers, you see, or the little extras on the DVD, you see some interview of her. And it's wonderful to listen to her. Here are some of the things she said. Mr. Tolson was my freshman English teacher, and he had been told I was a good student. I was my high school valedictorian. Mr. Tolson had a different way of handling his students. Now here's an interesting gender comment. He got on the boys. I never heard him say anything embarrassing to a girl. Kind of an interesting little comment. But we studied in his living room, and we sat on the floor. We debated back and forth. We debated Mr. Tolson. We debated both sides. We could take anything. We were not afraid. We had worked too hard. The third woman, and I'll just speak briefly about her, is actually a woman who once sat where you are sitting. Well, maybe not actually. But she graduated from the predecessor of the current Department of Communication, the old Department of Speech Communication, about 1968. She was my contemporary, a little bit younger than me. But I was somewhere else. But she graduated from the University of Washington. And Christine Gregoire who I believe is 5'8".
Just like me.
What's that?
Just like me.
She seems that, like you. But she came back to, when she was Attorney General of the state of Washington, she had just won billions of dollars for the state governments against the tobacco companies, and was really a brilliant litigator and very effective. She came back to her old Department of Speech Communication, and gave a lecture to the students, what I have learned in life and so forth. And I asked a question of her. I said, now you've been very famous Attorney General, later became governor, winning billions of dollars in the courts of the land for your clients. What was the one thing, the one course or idea that you studied at the University of Washington that helped you? She said it was debate. And it was the research that I had to do for debate. Well, I wanted to kiss her right then, but that wouldn't have...
She was too tall.
She was too tall. Yeah, and a little bit intimidating. So, but what a wonderful model that we all have. Here was a woman on the debate team, in argument, becomes the Attorney General, and then the governor of the state of Washington. She was here at one time, just like you. Now, just another little bit of history. Oh, the other person that's famous from this program was Tom Foley. He debated in the, I think it was the 40s or the 50s. I think it was the 40s for the University of Washington. And he went around and participated in public discussions as part of the debate program in the old Department of Speech. He became the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States. He was sitting where you were sitting, figuratively, maybe literally at some point. And he was, in some ways of thinking, the second or third most powerful person in the country, maybe in the world, as the Speaker of the House of Representatives. He was where Nancy Pelosi or John Boehner sat. Another graduate of this program. But we're emphasizing the women, and we have such a great one in Christine Gregoire, but what a pair they would make. I think he's 5'11". I just want to say one more thing, or just two more things. One, in the 1949 to 50 season of the University of Washington debate program, we used to have one, we've got one again now, I'm thrilled. The men's varsity debate shows 12 active participants, and women's varsity debate, 9 members. Then they had several other debating groups for a total of 40 students. They made 245 appearances to a wide variety of audiences, totaling over 14,500 in attendance, as well as attending many tournaments and giving public debates on campus. And there's no breakdown as to women versus men for these numbers. But there was a vital, an active women's debate program in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And I think we're right at the moment where, under Dr. Souter's leadership, this is going to return, and I'm thrilled. In 1938, I have this little book here. It shows a photograph of the men's varsity debate squad and of the women's varsity debate squad, and I count 17 men and 14 women on the varsity debate squad in 1938. That year, they reached 19,000 people through their debating. The other thing, I had a student in the argumentation course a couple of quarters ago, and she was a woman. And I said, "Why are you taking this course?" She said, "I want my father to listen to me. I want to learn to argue better." Well, I think there are a lot of motives that people have for taking an argumentation class and for being on the debate team. I did it for 4 years in college, and I debated both sides, just as Henrietta did, and in 300 judge debates. And I like to think that made me an open-minded man. I like to think many things.
Last but not least, Lindsay Shook.
So I sort of get to bring us full circle on this one. Once upon a time, the story of gender and argumentation sort of goes something like this. Men created argument and logic, and the rest of us tried to catch up. Women weren't allowed to participate, and as we learned earlier, when they were, it was largely discredited or not seen as valuable. And even into the 20th century, women weren't recognized as potentially valuable assets to argumentation, and when they were recognized largely as part of their male cohorts or their husbands. So, what happened was we began to believe, and what we began to see, was a style of argumentation that seemed to be particularly feminine. Carolyn Gorse Campbell, one of the most forefront in this field, makes the argument that the feminine style is personal, collaborative, experiential, and empowering. And that personal, collaborative, experience-based, empowering style has been shown by women throughout centuries of rhetoric, she says. The question becomes, is this feminine style something that women are inherently, or is this something we're taught over time? And by no means is this a question I'm going to answer in the next 5 minutes. But the idea, and I think that several of the panelists have already talked about this, is that we want, or for many, we want the happy ending to be that the feminine and the masculine style find some way to sort of marry and get along and live happily ever after. My argument is that we'd be better off if we stopped thinking of argument as feminine and masculine. If we stopped thinking of rhetoric as feminine and masculine, and instead turned our attention to how women and men, or feminine and masculine styles, get disadvantaged or advantage. So, I work with undergrads. That's mostly what I do. I teach debate and have for the better part of a decade. And one of my goals is to help all of them become better advocates than they were when they walked into my classroom. It's the goal of most professors and the goal of most debate coaches I know. And the question is, do I treat the women in my classrooms any differently than I treat the men? Do I treat female debaters, as we sort of learned in the Great Debaters example, differently than I treat male debaters? And the answer, I hope, on a day-to-day basis is no. There are good reasons to treat them differently. I think we socialize women differently. I think that one of the arguments for sometimes treating women differently in debate is that we have trained and socialized most women in this country to act less directly confrontational. So it is less okay for women to directly challenge their male counterparts in classrooms. It's less acceptable for them to challenge authority. And when they do challenge authority, it is almost always through one of the following means: asking for help, deferral to somebody else's idea, or the sort of, in general, desire to help the other people around them. None of these things are bad. In fact, I wish more students asked for help. I wish more of them deferred to good ideas. And I wish that more of them sort of sought collaboration. The problem for me is not that there are feminine styles. The problem for me is attaching it to the identity of women. When we assume that women enact those particular strategies and that men don't, we ignore a plethora of evidence to the contrary. President Clinton was often seen as the first black president, probably also accurately depicted as one of the first female presidents. He had a very feminine style of talking, very smooth, very experientially based, right? Lots of stories, lots of personal connections, and Obama has largely followed in his footsteps. By the way, Reagan did this too, so it's not just the liberals. And the idea is that in politics they've learned stories get you votes. People get them, they relate to them. And so we've adopted a lot of these so-called feminine styles to deal with political questions. So it's not just women anymore using the feminine style. It's not just men using intimidation, right? And I think that we saw examples of both of those things in previous panels or in previous arguments by the panelists. So the question becomes, why do we still hold to these notions that women tend to argue in one way and men in another, right? So they sort of, women are from Venus, men are from Mars, standard of debate and argumentation. And I think the reason is because it makes sense in our day-to-day lives. When we look around, we see women doing the things that women do, and we see men being aggressive or being more logical, and we see women as more emotional, etc. My challenge at the end of this, and my challenge to myself on a day-to-day basis, is instead of thinking of gender as the ultimate dividing line between men and women and the way they speak, that instead we should think of it as most men and women draw from both sides of those strategies. And that if you let them and stop thinking of them as entirely feminine or entirely masculine, you will start to see those patterns emerge just as often as you see the others. And for me, it's helped to make my students better advocates, and it's made me do things like push the women in my classes to stop doing things like referring back to the sort of damsel in distress, I don't know what's going on, somebody please come save me. And the men in my class from doing sort of the opposite, right? From either becoming more intimidating or relying on sort of these tropes and archetypes. And I think it's pushed everybody, I hope, to make better, more well-warranted arguments. And I think that that's something we see both in debate and in the classroom. Thanks.
Considering that I gave them almost no indication of what each other were going to speak about, I think that was pretty impressive about how well that cohered together, that fit together as different perspectives, which is the goal that we had. And I sort of want to direct a couple questions to start the conversation about this in sort of an interactive way. We're pretty close to getting to the point where we can. I'll open it up to the floor for questions. Although I do want to remark, first of all, that one thing I really liked about the discussion was how positive it was, and how wonderfully positive it was. But let me start out with this question, which is with this basic question: what, if anything, and this is open to the panelists' answers, what, if anything, needs to change about the way society views women in positions of advocacy to continue women's progress in American society? Some of that's implicit in the answers we've given about science and law and history and education. But let me make the point a little bit more pointed. What needs to change, if anything, in the way that we talk about women or women's advocacy or think about women in those positions? And you can speak from your own fields. In fact, I would really appreciate it if you speak from your own fields and your own experience. That'd be great. Anyone want to jump on that? Will I give you a microphone?
I'll jump on it. I think, I'm not sure if I'm going to answer your question exactly. I think there needs to be a change. I don't know if it's in the way we talk about things. There needs to be a change in how people do things. I think we need to have more women scientists. There need to be more role models for us. Because intellectually we know a woman can be a scientist just as much as a man, right? But we don't see very many of them. We don't see them certainly in the public sphere. And so those stereotypes stay with us. And I think the same thing is true with respect to politicians. We need, frankly, we need a woman president, okay? I'm teaching American Public Address, contemporary American Public Address this quarter, and we're halfway through the quarter, and we haven't read a single woman. And the reason for that is we're mostly looking at presidential speeches, and there aren't any women presidential speeches to read in American Public Address. So I think we need to have more women, and that's a challenge to all of you, more women out there in positions of power in science and politics. You need to close it down.
That's all right. Let me ask the question a little bit differently then. Let's take the way when we see women in public, when women are engaged in the most obvious kinds of national or state level politics, and the commentary about women a lot of times is immediately directed to things like appearance or family or qualification. Is that related to the way women are the way we think about women in positions of advocacy? Is it because is there anything that needs to change about that, maybe, or in that sort of realm?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the focus on like Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin really draws light to this, right? To some extent, this happens to Michelle Obama too. It's a question of, are they being good enough mothers? Is it okay? Or even worse, which is, what are they wearing? And is that an acceptable thing to wear? We have so few conversations about that when it comes to male politicians, that I think that it becomes a problem. We focus more on we always focus on superficial things in politics, sadly, but I think the media is drawn to asking more superficial questions, not that family is superficial, but more superficial questions about dress and about tone when it comes to women, and honestly when it comes to minority candidates as well, as this certainly happened to Obama. And that has to stop. I don't know why we evaluate women or minority candidates in those instances any differently than we evaluate white men.
That sounds like a good plan. It seems like going to the equality model doesn't work here. We don't want to start talking about how men dress more.
I think that's a bad
I mean,
plan.
what about that hair, right? You know, it's just.
Could have worn a different tie.
Yeah, I mean, Jay Inslee, I don't know. Is that his? Is that his hair? The thing that I thought about when you asked that question, and I hesitate to bring this up as an example, but when I teach at the law school seminar, and several years ago I had a class that was equally men and women, male and female students, and you know, it's a seminar, so you want people to talk, students that is, not just me. And we were having pretty good discussions, but I realized that they were dominated. We were into like week 3, and they were dominated may be the wrong word here, but more men were participating in discussion. And I sort of, you know, blew a whistle in the week 4, and I said, what's going on here? Why are we doing this? And we had a good discussion about that, and the men and the women both talked about it, and a number of the men said that they were kind of holding back, you know, trying to make some space for the women to talk, and the women talked about, you know, they were thinking, or all the sorts of comments that you hear reported in some of the research about why women hesitate to raise their voices in class. And we all vowed to do better, and I told the men not to hold back, that I didn't, you know, want to spend the time listening to myself talk. And we all did better for about 2 weeks, and then people lapsed into the same roles, and it was very, very frustrating. And I still don't know the answer, except I exhort my students in my undergraduate class and in the law school. I try to encourage them to talk more, and to make, you know, what I can do to make that a comfortable experience for them. But really, if leaning in means anything to me, it means that women have to exercise their voices, and you can't and shouldn't depend on men deferring to you. I've certainly been in many meetings where I've had to, you know, jump in and claim my right to make the argument in a particular case when we're working on team litigation. And you know, you just have to do it, and the women have to do it. They have to just take they just have to take that risk, opening their mouths.
So let me open up the floor to questions that you might have for the panel, and maybe questions or comments or thoughts. You know, I'd like to have those comments as much as possible result in that you're asking for some sort of reaction rather than informing them what you thought. And, yeah, here's what I thought. There you go. But let's see. Go ahead, Karen.
Have any of you, well, let me back up. In the last decade, I think there's been a return to thinking a little bit about single-gender high school and possibly middle school as well. I'm wondering if any of you have thought much about the value of that, or how that figures into this discussion, where girls are just in school with girls, boys just in school with boys.
Yeah, that's tough. I went to an all-girls high school, and it was transformative for me. I was very shy. In fact, I feigned laryngitis. My mother made me take speech, class, and one of many ways in which she was right. I was too shy to talk. I took speech class. I feigned laryngitis with my first assignment, which was to say what I did over the summer to my 6 fellow students. I was terrified. I can't talk. So, and it was great. It was, and I don't know if I could have done that in a mixed gender class at that time, being who I was. So there are, the studies are kind of hard to refute. There are some benefits to both males and females from single-sex education. Should we do it? I don't know. I think that's such a personal decision, but it's enjoying a renaissance because of those demonstrable benefits.
So I work in a high-tech industry, but I work with a lot of women who are from different cultures. And a lot of this conversation is a very American-centric point of view. But if we want to listen to the quiet voices, the ones who are culturally not taught to speak out, how would you encourage them to engage in public debate?
I think this is interesting because the kind of intercollegiate debate that I coach and that Dr. Souders coaches has a decent representation of international students from time to time, and I think that the reason is because they have time to prepare, they have time to sort of think their arguments all the way out, and it, although it is combative, although it is forceful in the way that people argue, one of the strategies that I've adopted from that kind of debate that I use in my classrooms to get people who may not feel as comfortable talking in front of a class, which is totally understandable, or in a group of colleagues, is to give them more time to sort of write out and think out their positions, and then to sort of say, how did you arrive at that conclusion? What are sort of to sort of approach it from a process standpoint instead of from an endpoint, right? So instead of saying, what is your argument? How, the sort of like, what's the goal here? You can say, how did we come to this conclusion? What were we looking for? And I think that helps to sort of get some people who may not normally, particularly women who have been socialized to be more passive or be quieter or more contemplative in their approach to things, a way to sort of exercise their advocacy without always having to think on the spot or say it out loud in the most combative of environments.
Well, I think too that it brings up the same question about styles that you were mentioning, that to ascribe a certain style to all women is just a mistake. But to notice that different styles have their different uses, and that the more of these styles that you have in your toolbox, the better. And I think that we need to both model but also teach our students and colleagues that applies multiculturally just as well, that you want to be able to adapt to a different style if you're wanting to maximize what that particular group can accomplish. And I've found that to be true in committees full of lawyers too, all female lawyers, that there is a very, what you would call the American style, kind of aggressive and takes up a lot of space in the room, and some of the other lawyers, they just didn't want to participate, and that just doesn't work. You're not getting the full value out of that group if you don't learn to, be conversant in those different styles. I think that's just the way we have to all go. So,
Can I ask a follow on that? Does that require a particular patience? So, like when I ask, when I'm sort of a jump ahead kind of person, but when I watch other people do this, even when people try to hesitate and say, okay, the whole group's not getting involved, you wait, the comment is small or short or reluctant, and you sort of, and then people tend to be impatient and then jump forward again. Does that make sense? Well, we got that, let's go.
yeah, I think it requires curiosity, mainly. I suffer from the impatience too. I tend to think of people I know, oh yeah, she speaks in paragraphs. I got to be careful here not to interrupt but I do think it takes, not the kind of patience you need around a 5-year-old, definitely, but I think it's mostly curiosity and just understanding that there is something likely that's very valuable to be added, and you just have to pretend you're in a different country, I don't know, whatever it takes to make that adaptation.
I have a question for Dr. number of incredible researchers who were denied professorships or even to participate in doctoral programs. Rosalind Franklin is one whose research was stolen by Watson Crick. She discovered the double helix. Is there any movement within the scientific community to bring the history of these women to the forefront? Because it just seems like, you know, we don't hear about them, and yet they have been, I mean, the only one I'd ever heard of prior to Rosalind Franklin was Marie Curie.
Right.
So, you know, we have this huge century of empty, but women were participating in science. So I was wondering if there was a movement or...
Well, I mean, I think we are hearing more about it. I don't know that we're hearing this is sort of a movement within the scientific community, but I think we certainly see it within history of science, right? So we've been getting these wonderful histories of people like Rosalind Franklin, and I think that as there's been sort of this move in history that is sort of trickling out, so within the academy that's sort of trickling down to the K through 12 education. But I think that this sort of revisionist history of science that emphasizes the feminist contributions to science, and the women who would have been able to contribute more had they not had the restraints put upon them. That sort of history gets done in the academy first, and then it starts going out into the schools. And the same thing is true with respect to other aspects of history, too. History with respect to race, and I just noticed my son, who's in 7th grade, was his whole class was writing on Columbus, hero or villain, and every one of them wrote villain. And I just couldn't imagine myself being even asked that question, or of anyone in my class answering it in that way back when I was going to school. So I think that this sort of thing sort of trickles out, but it just takes some time.
When you say revisionist
Revisionist history,
you mean that the revision in a positive way?
In a positive way,
Right,
that's
exactly.
right.
Not in the way that sometimes it's used negatively, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. I see revisionist history as a good thing.
That's a good thing, right? Right.
You mentioned as far as appearance, so how women appear, and then how the children would draw a scientist and most would draw a male. I wonder, I mean, the percentages of women in universities, and then obviously over the last 30 years, the percentage of women in science has grown exponentially. And won't that, as you said, sort of trickle automatically? Isn't that behavior? I mean, do we have to push the behavior, or won't it sort of happen naturally as that larger percent of women graduates from school, and then, you know what I mean?
And we hear their stories, right?
Isn't that perpetual? Right?
I mean, I think that's the hope, I guess, but at this point, we aren't there. So we do have many more women going to college. We don't have many more women becoming scientists, right? The statistics you gave at the beginning were like less than 30%.
Less than 30% in all sciences.
So I think we're not there yet. But when we get there, yes. I mean, I think that a lot of it is seeing the role models and having the image then changed in your mind will come from what you see.
Well, I saw a linear projection, a study that did the progress that we've made, projected that forward has been phenomenal since 1992. I'm thinking of politics now, and government. You will see a sex-equal Congress in the year 2500 at current rates of progress. So the trickle-out theory it's a trickle. So 2500, I think corporate integration was around like 2270 or something. So we won't see it, our children won't see it, our great-grandchildren won't see it. You know, it's a long, long way, if that's the rate of progress. So.
We didn't get here naturally either in that sense, right? It's required people to push it, is the argument, right? So we just can't sort of let it doesn't flow on its own. It's because there's no people behind it.
Well, and I think women still are not really being encouraged to go into the sciences. And there was this wonderful article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about that very issue. It was written by a woman who was quite good at physics, as an undergraduate. She did an undergraduate honors thesis that was just amazing, but her professor didn't encourage her to go on to graduate school, and she didn't. And, you know, if you look now at that there are some women who are physics professors, but there just aren't a whole lot. And if they don't get that encouragement, if they get this idea that what a scientist is male and aggressive and isolated, then they're not, women are going to end up going to college more, but then maybe not going into the sciences. And I think, you know, if you look at how women are portrayed in pop culture, I have a grad student who wrote a paper recently on the Big Bang Theory, the show, right? And the gender politics in that, and you know, admittedly, none of the characters is all that admirable, but the female characters, you know, who do you want to be? Do you want to be Penny, or do you want to be, you know, the egghead who's, you know, not attached to reality? It's sort of we need some more positive images out there before, I think, we'll end up getting the change in population that will then change our thinking.
Dr. Phillips, if I can direct your question your way real quick.
Okay.
One of the things I thought was interesting is you mentioned that on the UW team, on the UW team in its previous iterations, there were a remarkable number of women involved compared to the makeup of the current intercollegiate debate community. And part of that, you know, in some ways that's not necessarily reflective, because currently we don't have it in academic debate, in intercollegiate debate, we don't divide between women and men's competition. That divide is gone. But what do you think, do you have any thoughts about what accounts for high participation of women in the past on the UW debate team, whereas you may or may not be aware, we run at about, what, 30%? Is that right, Mr.? About 30% participation for women. So as compared to these numbers, which are almost getting close to even. Do you have any thought about that? I can push you about?
No, I don't. No, I really don't. You know, it just, you know, it's one interesting thing to think about, though, in that, you know, they had these two separate, you know, just like the women's colleges idea, their own separate. I mean, I came into debating at a time when there still were would be a women's division at a debate tournament, but I got in on the tail end of that, and in some ways, I'm not the person to give this comment, but at least in some ways, I felt women were disadvantaged when they were thrown in with the men, not because they weren't as good, but because they were just disadvantaged because they were women. And so with this women's team and the men's team, you kind of cut out that to some degree, it seems to me.
Right. So there was less pressure there was less inter pressure from other genders on union participation. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I would just one little. I sort of think anecdotally a lot.
Yeah.
And just as a comment, I mean, I worked recently for two women scientists who employed me on their NSF and NIH grants. One a physicist and one a nursing scientist. A recent president of the University of Washington was a woman scientist. There certainly are models out there, and I don't mean to say there isn't a problem, there aren't barriers, but simply to say, and only to say, that there are models out there of women in science and women scientists running universities.
I have a question for Dr. Phillipson. It sounded like in your part of the debate that you were really emphasizing the power of debate. And I'm wondering if you think that debate is an effective tool for combating and testing the validity of cultural beliefs, particularly that women hold about themselves or about themselves in the community and in the public sphere, that helps them to break free of that. You know, using debate as a method for testing those beliefs, thereby moving through them to achieve what these women you've listed have achieved. Do you think that is the case?
Well, I do, and I do, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, and I don't have a considered answer to that. But I do think my impulsive answer is that, yes, debate is an activity that is ideally suited to achieve that end. And I say that because I come from a bedrock view of the utility of debate. Now, sometimes it gets skewed and done in ways that maybe work against some particular goal or ideal we might have. But where in the world do things get more rigorously tested than they do in structured oral controversy? I don't think anywhere you get that in anything that anywhere any better than you do in debate. Maybe in the scientific establishment through the publication process and peer review, maybe. But I would hold up debate as a methodology for the seeking of probable truth as the methodology par excellence. I mean, I would say, you know, I teach argumentation and debate occasionally as an amateur. I mean, amateur in the good sense, but I'm not a professional scholar in that area. But I've come to believe that a course in debate could stand as a course in method or epistemology on a par with courses in epistemology or on a par with courses in the scientific method. So that's this is kind of a naive answer in a way, because I haven't thought through all the ramifications of your, what I think is a terribly fascinating idea. But so that's my gut reaction.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So, I think it's interesting you guys talk about getting more advocacy and role models in that respect. I think panels like this would do a great job of that, and you guys are all here definitely being good advocates for women in communication. My question is, what kind of progress have you guys seen in like academia? Most of you do work in academia, and you guys do such a great job. What role do you guys think that plays in sort of advocacy, and where do you see that going?
I can say from my own experience, things have changed a lot. When I was an undergraduate, I actually went 5 years. The 5 year, we could do that back then. It was tuition wasn't what it is today. And I had only 2 professors in all that time who were female. This was at UC Berkeley. 5 years, 2 women. In my graduate program, I had 3 years of coursework. There were no women who taught me in my main area of rhetoric. I took 2 courses from women. They were not in my main area. And so, you know, and now I look at the Department of Communication, and I think there's more female than male professors. You know, you count them. I don't know if things have changed at Berkeley or Northwestern where I went, but I know that as I look around me now, I just see more women, at least in the social sciences and humanities. So I think there's been some progress made on that ground, at least.
Do you see any more like obstacles for academia?
Well, I mean, I think that the obstacles for women in academia are the same as the obstacles for women in any profession. I think that if you look at the statistics, women are generally paid less than men. And that's true in academia as it is anywhere else. And I don't know how to fix that. But, you know, we're here, at least. And that's a change.
Go ahead.
My question is for Ms. Novotny. America seems to me to have sort of a strong historical template for its relations to genders, you know, women as homemakers, men as pioneers, and minorities in certain spheres. And in your comments, I heard you say, or this is what I took it as, is that you chose to sort of not see yourself as a particular advocate for being a woman on the job. You just choose to sort of show up and be who you are and let your knowledge and aptitude speak for itself. that pretty close?
Yeah, I think I was trying to describe that probably tool that all of you in one way or another use, which is to be less self-conscious of anything that might impede your doing your job. So in the same way I would ignore that I showed up with the wrong notes or the wrong skirt, I'm just going to do my job and not dwell on the fact that I know there are some people probably who can't get past the perceiving me as a woman. That said, I know that there are instances, I know in this one particular case in the Supreme Court, I had to really acknowledge to myself that I had a problem justice, that I needed to deal with his way of treating me. And going into an argument, I made a plan for that. So, for the most part, you just, don't think about it, but it's not because you're ignorant of it.
So you see yourself, so would you see it as more of a detriment, emphasizing the fact that you're a woman, or do you see it as an advantage, just sort of being who you are, and not really sort of keeping an eye on people that are behind you or with you, or, I mean, I realize it could be tricky, but
I think that, and I'll just borrow a page from Professor Shook and just say that for the most part, I act as if I belong there, and focus on why I'm there and just do that. And I'm looking ahead. That's, this is where we should be. And so it works pretty well most of the time.
thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So there was talk about a need for a woman and female president in the U.S., and as a leader in world politics, seem to be lagging in this respect. Norway has had 2 female prime ministers, and the first female president was elected in 2007 in India. So what can we learn from these countries, and what should be done differently within our local power?
Totally cut the line. Okay, I think, I'm not sure exactly what we can take from all of those different countries, to the extent that there are really particular political climates, right? There are really particular political climates in almost any country that decides to elect a female leader at a particular time. Often I think it's mostly because of their political standpoints and their ability to rise to power within the party that they've sort of gotten themselves, the party that they've aligned themselves with, right? Which is certainly the case in India. So part of it is, I think, what we talked about earlier, which is that the American media system and sort of the political system is designed to, or seems to be designed to, focus on some of the most asinine features of advocacy when it comes to female and minority candidates, right? And so instead of focusing on stances and on political questions, we worry about whether or not they got teary-eyed, we worry about whether or not they were wearing the right color, we worry about whether or not this means that they can go home. And it's not that those, it is that the first 2 versions of those questions are terrible. And it is that the second version of question of family is not a question we ask male politicians when they come up to run for office. And so I think that as a society and as citizens, one of the things we should stop doing is paying attention to those things and start demanding better questions be asked, right? Whether you're for or against a particular female candidate, you should be demanding that their issues be heard and not that their, dress be vetted appropriately. And so I think that as a public, that's what we can do, right? We can sort of demand better of our media and of the people sort of addressing those concerns, because we're not going to see a female president in a world where we can't get over whether or not Hillary Clinton cried in a particular primary, or whether or not, Sarah Palin's kids are, pregnant or anything of that nature, right? I mean, if those are the concerns that we think about when we think of female candidates, then we're not ever going to be in a situation where we take them seriously enough. And so I think pushing, the things to learn from those countries is that when someone rises to leadership in their party, we should probably take them seriously as candidates, regardless of what their gender is. And I think that's what we've been able to see in places where they've had women in those sort of top leadership positions, is that they've put aside the fact that they're women and taken their party seriously and their issues seriously.
I wouldn't for a minute argue against any of these structural problems, the existence of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Having said that, I think there's a case to make for individual action. The individual rhetor. If you saw Condoleezza Rice talk at the last Republican nominating convention, I mean, I don't like some of the things she stands for, but after I heard that speech, I wished she was on the ballot. I would have voted for the woman. I would have voted for the person. She's also a graduate, like me, of the University of Denver. She was the outstanding junior girl one year. I dated the outstanding junior girl, but I was nowhere near the outstanding senior boy, or junior, or sophomore, or freshman. But so there is, I mean, how do you break through these things? Sometimes the breakthrough is the skilled rhetor. Ronald Reagan overcomes all kinds of stereotypes. As a dumb guy, and maybe he was dumb, I don't know. But, and right or wrong, the power of his rhetoric, it seemed to me, gave him a breakthrough.
Well, and Obama's a great example of that too, right?Is ability as a skilled
Yes.
rhetor to sort of overcome a lot of those questions was unparalleled.
But also exposing now that with President Obama, I don't think we can any more doubt that we continue to have a terrible problem with racism in this country. I mean, what's the whole Affordable Care Act? Not to be too political here, but it's hard not to think that there's a lot of racism. And I think the answer to your question is there's a lot of sexism too. And Hillary Clinton, every time she gains some prominence, I think whatever people say, what is motivating that is a lot of sexism. People aren't ready for that here. Distinctly different from even Great Britain. I don't know what our problem is. Yeah, Germany, yeah, exactly, right. We have a problem.
Well, but you look at Germany, I mean, Angela Merkel is one of the most popular politicians in Europe.
Yeah, I know, it's great.
And so, or you look at Margaret Thatcher.
One of the least popular.
In Britain, she was the most popular for a long time. So, I mean, my point is, individual women can break through. And to me, I'm not trying to argue against the argument of prejudice, the argument of structural barriers, but sometimes I think that there's a scientific claim that can be made and supported. Sometimes the genius or the skill of the individual rhetor can break through those things. I think discourse can transform circumstances.
Billie Jean King beat Bobby Riggs.
That's right. And once you have that shift, then there's a new way of thinking, right? I mean, there's another
Yes.
really good article in the New York Times recently about Angela Merkel, and the author starts out by saying, when an 8-year-old girl on the Berlin subway asks her mother if it's possible to have a male chancellor, you know something profound has changed in Germany.
That's awesome.
Yeah, the counter narrative is in Australia, though, where their prime minister was just was a female, just went through this vicious attack and lost her position to somebody else in the party. And the opposite question was being asked there about, will a woman ever be, in that position again?
And I think it comes back to the local circumstances here. It's relevant to that because a debate program is an incubator of such people, men and women. And so, to me, if you say, well, the answer is that genius who can make the breakthrough, of character and talent and opportunity and so forth, but what is the incubator for that? And to me, I think it's the debate team. It's an incubator.
That's a great note to end on.
And
It was planned.
I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank all of our panelists who took time out of their very busy schedules to show up, because I know many of you did. And I'd like to give them one more round of applause. And we appreciate you being here. please finish up on your way out. You can, if they have time, that maybe they can talk to you, answer some questions. If not, they might have to leave. Finish off the coffee. I know it's a bad time of day to finish off the coffee.
No, y'all have
Do it
homework. I was gonna
anyway.
say, everyone's gonna
Thank you very much for being here.
brush your teeth, make sure everything's something, right?
I'm gonna see that movie, I've never seen that movie. I'm putting it on my list, I'm not gonna see it tonight.
Yeah, I want to- sorry.